In order to understand correctly the structure of the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe these days, we have to get back to 1984, because after 20 to 30 years, the first exiles and students belonging to the Muslim Brotherhood in their own origin countries settled down. They gather in Madrid, again, 1984, in order to put things down to paper. The time for them, or that's the way they understood, had come to organize, to settle down. It was still their own causes back in Syria and Jordan and Egypt were still alive. They understood that Europe was also the right place to carry out their own activities. It was a place to establish their own institutions, and that was a birth of a non-existent or no longer existent institution that ended up being Viole, now called the Council of European Muslims, in 1989, if I remember correctly. Viole, that's the way we refer to it nowadays, but the Council of European Muslims after 2020 is an umbrella that gathers all institutions, all associations which at national level belong, at least ideologically, to the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe. That doesn't mean that there are other organizations that belong to the Brotherhood, because this umbrella, Viole, just recognizes, or mostly recognizes, only one association, one institution per country, but it gathers the most important players like UOIF in France, or LMB in Belgium, or other representatives. Then Viole, when it started working, it also noticed, or it also assessed the necessity of building other institutions, trying to give them a sense of independence, which is not real, because we can find mostly the same individuals, key individuals in the network of the European Muslim Brotherhood at the head of these institutions. And these institutions try to cover and to represent European Muslims in all important fields for them. And that means education, such as the European Institute of Human Sciences, with headquarters in France, but also present in Germany and in the UK. We're also talking about their own economy and financing, establishing Europe Trust, their own tool for channeling money to their initiatives. We're also talking about the European Council for Fatwa and Research, an institution created in order to provide jurisprudence orientations to European Muslims. Of course, all of them with a very bombastic name, if I may, trying to confer a sense of legitimacy, a sense of representative that is not really real on the ground. So the European structure of the Muslim Brotherhood covers all aspects, from the national level, from grassroots militants acting at a local, national level in all European countries, to European institutions managed by a handful, if not a handful, 20, 30 key individuals that are their main tools for lobbying and holding relationship with the European establishment at a higher level. We have to understand that the Brotherhood in Europe has a comprehensive strategy, a strategy that covers local, regional, national, and pan-European levels. Most of the key individuals at the board of the national organizations linked to the Brotherhood and the Viole umbrella hold key positions at their own pan-European institutions. It's not because they try to give a sense of independency that one cannot really link among themselves and find that the same key players in France, Germany, the UK, Spain hold also the most important positions at their own pan-European institutions. That's the way they advance their agenda. This, by the way, does not mean that every national branch has a certain degree of independence in order to lobby local and national authorities in a certain way that differs from country to country, depending on the main topics present in the political agenda in the country, that can of course vary from Islamic feminism in Spain, for example, the Viole in France, which is a great issue, or other topics. So they work in a way that serves national interests, their own national interests in their respective countries, and at the same time they have these great network of institutions. In our last report, the Muslim Brotherhood's pan-European structure, we detail most of them. They also pursue, let's say, their own agenda, their own goals at a European level, portraying themselves as the sole representative of the Muslim community. The main reason between the existent branches of the Muslim Brotherhood are the size of their own community. There are countries where their presence is dated on a longer time, such as France, the UK, or Germany, where their presence is so big that they are really active in many fields, much more than in other countries where their presence can be tracked down, but it's not so big, such as countries in Eastern Europe, Romania, for example, Ukraine, where their presence is smaller. Even if they act in an organized way, and even if they hold tight connections between the key leaders, they have a degree of independence that allows them to pursue at the same time a shared global agenda, or same pan-European agenda in this case, and a national agenda according to the different topics that are, let's say, hot in their own respective countries. I describe the strategy as a very or highly comprehensive one. I think they all agree on the short-term goals, and I, of course, think they do share, let's say, a utopian, long-term, if not unrealistic goal of Islamizing the West. For the time being, the strategy is oriented to build a stronger Muslim identity, an identity which is based in their own orthodox understanding of what Islam has to be, not only at an individual level, as most European countries understand religion as an individual practice, but also as a political way of advancing their own goals, and a whole system, a holistic system that should govern the believer's life. I would describe the strategy as a fully comprehensive one, coordinating from the national level to the pan-European level. We have to understand that they have shared goals at the short or mid-term, which is building an identity which is based in their own understanding of Islam and how a Muslim should live his life, something that surpasses the individual side of the believer's life, driving it to a more active and a more committed person in his own society at a local, then regional, then national, then pan-European level. And of course having in mind that they also share an utopian goal of Islamizing the West, which is something, of course, which is not realistic today. But in any case, that's what they believe. We also have to say that a main point of the strategy is representing Muslims. something that at the same time darkens the voices of other Muslim individuals and of other Muslim communities, giving a sense of homogeneity that is not true and doesn't really hold to reality. Most of the key individuals managing national and pan-European brotherhood structures are an elite. They've been educated in the best universities, they're very successful businessmen, and they're very attuned, they follow closely what are the main debates in the European arena, what are the main topics, the most appealing ones to the youth or the European Parliament. So they've polished their own discourse, their own narrative in a very successful way. However, they find themselves very often at a crossroads. They have to suit European narratives and European standards of talking openly as their representatives of the most important communities, but they also have to satisfy what their more conservative audience, their original audience, wants to listen, and that of course causes trouble from time to time, because it is not easy to hold a certain discourse, for example, in favor of human rights or LGBTQ communities in Europe, and then holding or preaching on completely different values in more restricted contexts. The relationship exists. One cannot deny that. Ideology is the same, but after a very long time, European offshoots of the Muslim Brotherhood and their own pan-European institutions are completely independent from, politically speaking, from, let's say, the centers of power that are usually placed in Egypt. That doesn't mean that they don't share a global ideology and that they are not connected on a personal level to each other, but the European offshoots, the European branches of the Muslim Brotherhood are completely independent to make their own decisions and to make those decisions suit their own agenda and advance their own goals that at the same time are shared goals with the global Muslim Brotherhood here in Europe. These days, plenty of these figures remain, let's say, figures of the past. New generations are taking over. Rashid al-Ghannouchi, the leader, all-time leader of Ennahda, is no longer focusing on European issues. It is true that he made part of the first, let's say, board of members of the European Council for Fatwa and Research, and he was very active in the British milieu. He's a very representative and respected figure. There are others, just to mention a couple of them in the UK, Azam at-Tamimi or Anas at-Tigriti. But the truth is, not only because they're too easy to recognize, but because younger generations are taking over, generations that have been born and bred in Europe, they no longer have the same specific weight they used to have till the beginning of the century. So now this poses a problem, because identifying ideologies behind people that are not so easily recognizable is a real challenge for the research, for the academic community. But the truth is that many of these figures, after the Arab Spring, and mostly in those countries where the Arab Spring developed into revolution, went back to their own countries and focused again in their own national causes. Just like other European countries, the first, or the pioneers of the Muslim Brotherhood were Syrians, mostly Syrians, Palestinians, Egyptians and Jordanians that settled in Spain at a personal level, or as students or exiles, trying to leave the countries where they were being persecuted. the Spanish dictator Francisco Franco signed several agreements with these countries seeking recognition that he was not able to find in Europe, and that opened the door for these exiles, Islamists, many of them, that settled in Spain. These exiles started organizing in the 70s and, of course, in a better shape in the 80s, and started creating the first Spanish structures that can be identified as Muslim Brotherhood offshoots, like the AME, that would be the Spanish acronym, the Spanish Association of Muslims, and replicating what happens in the rest of Europe, they started creating national institutions to represent Muslim in different fields. A difference that is not worthy to mention is that in Spain, given our own history and our relation with North Africa, even if Syrians were the first to create brotherhood structures, in the 80s we had several waves of migration that brought a lot of Tunisian Islamists, several Moroccan Islamists, and a conflict appeared between the different members of the Brotherhood, different sensibilities, different nuances between Al-Mashriq and Al-Maghrib, so East and Western parts of the Arab world, which drove the situation to a complete absence of relations and two very well differentiated branches of the Muslim Brotherhood, something that still applies today, even if younger generations collaborate between themselves.